the Pennsylvania Railroad Class S2. Now, I'm going to be upfront with you guys and tell you that I really had to fight myself on even putting this one on the list. Because, I'm going to be real, I love this train. Because, look at it! The S2 is a 686 steam train. We'll get into more detail later, but if you look at it, it's just... God, it's so cool looking! Lionel made a ton of toys of this train. I actually have two of them. One was my grandfather's, one was my dad's. So, like, I have a history with this particular engine model, and it's such a nice looking steam train, and I adore it. But was it any good is what we're talking about today. And it was an experimental single engine. There was only one ever built, and, well, okay. If it had been a regular steam engine, it'd probably be fine. You know, like, if they had modeled it like that, I mean, it probably, I imagine it would be okay. It's, you know, a 686, pretty big, pretty frickin' big, but, it probably would be fine. But it isn't. This is an experimental steam turbine locomotive. Now, what's the difference there? Well, it's complicated. And I'm not going to bore you with all the technical specifications because there's a lot of engineering that goes into this. But long story short, regular steam engines don't have turbines. They don't work that way. Steam turbines do have turbines, and the power output is revolving around the turbines and getting them to spin and producing the perpetual motion and things like, well, not perpetual motion, but you know what I mean. Like, the motion and the ocean and the rails and the wheels and... I told you it's complicated. This was new technology. And it still is kind of uncharted waters in terms of trains because there's only been a few experiments done with steam turbines and trying to make them work. But the potential here is that steam turbines are highly efficient in terms of fuel consumption when compared to a regular steam train. In fact, Union Pacific also did their own experiments in creating a steam turbine train, and those were failures. Was the S2 more successful? No, it wasn't. It wasn't at all. Now, in its defense, it was good at doing one thing, and that's going at speed. When it was going at a decent clip, high speeds, not only could it maintain that speed very well, but its fuel efficiency was outrageously good. It put a regular steam train to shame when it came to efficiency in that department. Because for the amount of fuel you were putting in and the energy you were getting out, its loss of, excess steam or power was minimal compared to a regular old school steam engine. Now the problem here is at speed, as I have repeatedly stressed. Only when it was at speed. It's when it was going slower, and that happens frequently on any railroad, that problems started to crop up. The firebox had to burn extremely hot to keep the steam pressure up to make the turbines go. And because it was going so slow, it ran into some serious efficiency issues at those speeds to the point of just being disgusting in fuel consumption. It ate so much fuel if it was going slowly that any amount of financial kickback you'd receive from its efficiency at speed meant nothing because it burned up everything else when it was going slow. It just didn't work in the way they'd hoped it would. Had it been comparable efficiency to a regular steam locomotive when it was going slow, it probably would have been a success and we would have seen more made. But because it couldn't be efficient at all at slow speed, it meant that making more didn't make sense. It probably didn't help that this was about the time that a lot of railways were starting to look at diesel locomotives. And the reason diesel replaced steam is that diesel was, at the end of the day, cheaper. Cheaper to run, cheaper to do everything. Could steam turbines have superseded that and possibly been even better than, diesel with newer designs or better technology? Possibly. But the amount of financial input that Pennsylvania Railroad would have had to put in order to make that work just wasn't feasible. It just didn't make any sense for them. So unfortunately the S2 was considered a failure and it was scrapped. But man, look at it! So freaking cool! And I hate that I had to put it on the list, but it's technically bad, but it's so cool. So freaking cool. the British Rail... British Rail. What is the matter with you people? Why are you doing this to me? Do you have a monopoly on crappy trains? Is that your whole thing? I don't understand. The British Rail Class 15, 16, and 17. Yeah, I put 3 different diesels on this spot because I'm not spreading them out to make up an entire frickin' list of nothing but British Rail nonsense. It doesn't make any... No, we're not doing that, especially when all these diesels actually have pretty much the same problem to different degrees. Now, you may be looking at the Class 15 right now and saying, wait, didn't you mention this once? And yes, I did. Back on my very first list, I had mentioned the 10800, which was also a piece of crap diesel by British Rail. And I mentioned that the 10800s were remodeled into 15s and 16s, and then they were better, right? Well, I did say that, but understand that I probably should have given further context. On the basis that saying that the Class 15s and 16s and 17s are better than the 10800 is kind of like saying it's better to be punched in the face by your neighbor when compared to being punched in the face by Mike Tyson in his prime. Like, that's a true statement, but you'd really just rather not be punched in the face. And that's kind of the deal with these. Alright, so first of all, understand that all these engines were created and, procured by British Rail under their 1955 modernization plan, where things were going to be sleek and cool and bring the British Rail into a new age of enlightenment and power, and things did not go according to plan. I feel like British Rail's problem is that they keep trying to take shortcuts to accomplishing their goals rather than doing anything the correct way. I think that's really their biggest issue. Because it's pretty much what happened. They got all these diesels, but they didn't really do, any kind of detailed work on making sure, like, if you had focused on just getting one really good diesel at a time, you probably would have been better off instead of getting a whole bunch of crappy ones. And that's pretty much what happened here. Class 15's biggest issue was the engine. Much like the 10800, again, better than the 10800's engine, but the Class 15 had Paxman engines, and as delivered, they were found to require excessive maintenance to avoid any kind of, failure, which they did. A lot. And even after modification, they still failed. The 16s were even worse, because they had the same engines, but in their case, they were designed with poor ventilation to the engines, so they would fail even more often when compared to the 15s because of that problem. And then you had the Class 17s, which were a complete and total friggin' disaster. Same engines, again, but for whatever reason, in its case, they just failed miserably. All the friggin' time! This design was not suited to pulling heavy freight trains, which is oddly what they wanted it for. And even after extensive modifications, the engines just never worked nearly as well as they needed to. The 17s were in fact so bad that it was estimated that they had about a 60% chance of being available to run at any given time. And, imagine you have a vehicle like that, like a car. Like you have to get up for work the next morning, but there's a 60% chance that your car will work. Which means there's a 40% chance that your car won't work. Those are really bad odds for a vehicle you need to use every day. These things were awful and were retired pretty friggin' quick. None of these classes lasted particularly long. The 15s stood out a little longer than the other two, but even they were considered pretty crap overall. And boy howdy, British Rail, stop doing this to me! I don't like doing this to you. Do you enjoy it? Do you? Because maybe that's why. General Electric U50C. Not to be confused with the General Electric U50. Those were pretty decent. The U50C was supposed to be an evolution of the U50. They look a little funny. I'm sure you probably noticed. They have a very distinctive design to them. A bit odd, but, if they run, they run. Whatever. Okay, fair enough. But the thing about the U50C was this. The whole point of the U-50C was to lighten the overall weight of the U-50s. The U-50s used 8 axles, but the U-50Cs were supposed to only use 6. Because there were going to be less axles, therefore less weight distribution overall, they had to lighten things. And one of the things they did, for example, was that they used aluminum wiring instead of copper because aluminum is lighter. Now the problem is at higher voltages, aluminum tends to get hotter a lot faster than copper will, to the point that electrical fires would happen a lot. And even when they tried to modify the entire trains with new wiring, they noticed that the trucks were suffering from stress cracks. All this on top of issues with the oil pressure, cooling water leaking all over the place, and there's the small itsy-bitsy problem, the dynamic brake grids, melting. Just minor things. It was decided that the U-50C was actually a complete piece of crap, and probably shouldn't be used for anything, ever! After they were withdrawn, 5 were let out for stationary power generators during a coal miners' strike. And then after that, they were all just sold for scrap, because... No, we're not playing this game with you, U-50C. I'm sorry, but no. The EMD SDP-40F. First of all, that name is a bit of a mouthful, so I'm just going to call it the P-40F the whole time, just so we're clear, but that's what we're talking about. This diesel was actually created for Amtrak, so we're still sticking with America, and it was one of the first diesels employed by the new government-run company, because when Amtrak inherited all the privatized railroads, when they was all conglomerated under, this government entity to keep the railroads running, Amtrak had an issue where all the railroads were using different stuff. And a lot of that stuff wasn't really cross-compatible or was too old and dated, etc., etc. So they needed a new diesel that could do all their sweeping stuff and all their long-range, large passenger trains. And that was what the P-40F was supposed to do. Did it do that? Well, it tried to kill everybody. The P-40F had one critical problem that kept cropping up. It's a fairly minor case of derailing repeatedly, like 13 times in the span of about 2 years. First of all, doing that once in the span of 2 years is usually considered bad, but 13 times? Now, by some Christmas miracle, the P-40F never managed to kill anybody. Not the lack of trying, mind you. But the derailments were happening so frequently that an investigation had to occur to figure out exactly why they were happening, and there were a few things that they noticed about the P-40F. For one thing, its trucks were not very stable. They didn't ride very smoothly, and there was kind of a side-to-side motion going on with the trains that probably wasn't helping. Another problem, and this was probably the biggest issue of all, is that these diesels were actually using steam generators for heat for the coaches. They were pulling old-style coaches that used steam heaters, so the diesels had to be equipped with them, and that implied that they had to have water tanks on board. The water would slosh back and forth as the train moved, and the diesel design did not take this into account. That, coupled with the fact that it sometimes was pulling trains that were a lot lighter than it was necessarily, designed for, meant the diesel swaying tended to get a lot worse overall than even it would be normally. And it is believed that all of this combined kind of made it so that the P-40F really just enjoyed jumping off the rails at any given moment. Again, somehow never managing to kill anybody. Thank God, but yo, P-40, what are you doing? If there's any consolation to the P-40's failure, it's that it paved the way for the F-40 PHR, which if you recognize this, well, yeah, you probably do recognize it. This diesel was a mainstay for Amtrak for years. The F-40, which was only designed for short commuter trains, actually managed to handle long-range lines extremely well, and in my opinion is one of the best diesels ever utilized by any railway ever. The P-40s, on the other hand, were just let go. It just wasn't worth the risk. Some were scrapped, and some were actually sold to Santa Fe. Santa Fe modified them a lot to try to limit their problems, and because they no longer had to worry about heating freight trains, they didn't have issues with derailments quite as often, if ever. Believe it or not, one of these is still preserved. It's currently on display in Boulder City, Nevada. So if you ever want to see a diesel that did everything in its power to kill everyone on board and somehow fail at it, well, there you go. Good work. The British Rail Class 28. I just can't deal with you people anymore. This better be the last time, that's all I'm trying to say, because if it isn't, I am going to get on a plane and travel to the UK and find your president and have a word, because this is getting outrageous. Okay? We need to talk about this. I am dying because you are killing me with this display of constant failure. Ugh. The Class 28 is also known as a Kobo diesel, which refers to its weird wheel layout, where there's a 6-wheel bogie at one end and a 4-wheel bogie on the other. Now mind you, this wheel layout actually had nothing to do with the Kobo's problems. Also, you may think it looks a little familiar, and if you watched Thomas the Tank Engine growing up, yeah, I can explain why very easily. See, the Kobo was the inspiration for Boko, the diesel from that series. Boko is unique on the basis that, in the original series anyway, he was one of the only diesels that was super friendly to the steam engines. He never really, treated them as anything lesser, whereas a lot of the diesels were jerks. Boko was really chill, really nice, and, served the railway well. And his namesake, the Kobo, did not do that at all. What was the problem with it? Well, there were two main issues with the Kobo. First of all, the engines didn't work. Like, ever. At all. They failed. Constantly. So often that the entire class was actually sent back to the manufacturer for them to actually fix the problem, because the railway was having none of it at this point, and to be fair, given their history with bad diesels, I kind of understand why they were losing it over this. Just a little bit by this point. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Oh, yeah, the other issue they were having, the windows kept falling out. No, seriously, the windows just fell out when the train was in motion. It's totally normal. I don't see why that would be a problem. It just fell out. I don't know, no big deal. The manufacturer was able to fix the window problem, but the engines never really got any better. And I don't really understand this myself, because to me, a big component of any train is to make sure it always runs. So you'd think the engine, of all things, would be the most tested component. And yet it seems like early diesels, especially over in Britain, just didn't work. Even when the Metro Vic Crosley engines were working, they had another major problem, in that they had a really nasty habit of belching horrific black smoke out. This was partially due to their hilariously bad fuel efficiency. They would sometimes just dump fuel into themselves, and then all of a sudden they just belch out horrific, noxious gas. And, I need to stress, this was in the early 60s when this was going on. Late 50s, early 60s. And I'm not sure the word environmentalism really even existed back then. And if it did, it wasn't taken very seriously. You are telling me that this diesel's exhaust was so bad that even people in an era where, coal companies could, produce all the horrific, noxious, gases that they wanted to, in that era, this train was apparently producing too much, fumes for it to be acceptable in that era. That's how bad it was. So, yeah, the Kobo was a miserable failure. Now, you may say, well, it sounds at least a little better than the second spot. It didn't try to kill anybody, and that's true, but I only put Class 28 on the number one spot because this thing is infamous in British rail history. Everyone knows about this frickin' thing, and everyone knows that it was horrible. Believe it or not, though, one of them managed to survive into preservation. Now, on one hand, I kind of dig that because I do think that their design is really nice. They look good, but they were not kept that way because anyone really wanted to do it. It's just worked out by coincidence. The research division of British Rail actually wanted one of these when they were taken out of service for the tribology test train. What's tribology? Well, it's the study of things coming together in relative motion, so like friction and, wheels touching rails. So, that makes sense. For whatever reason, they really wanted the Kobo for this, and actually used it for quite a decent amount of time before it was replaced. And even when it was replaced, the Class 15 Preservation Society, yes, that Class 15, actually signed an agreement to be the custodians of this engine to try to preserve it. So a whole bunch of rail fans coming together to keep around two of the worst diesels ever made. I don't know why they were doing that, but hey, you know what? I'm all for keeping history around. I'm all for preserving things for public display. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this list if I didn't at least somewhat appreciate the missteps in the course of rail history. So, here we are. At the end of the day, all these trains were pretty bad. Some worse than others. Some tried to kill some people, some just had bad engines, and some had technology that just wasn't ready yet. But all in all, we can appreciate the fact that none of us have had to ride on any trains that have been on this list so far. Unless, of course, you rode the Pacer trains from the first part, in which case I am so sorry, because wow! Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.